In this lesson, students will examine the differences between observational studies and experiments, define types of variables, and learn the importance of randomization. So this lesson actually falls on the 6th day of Unit 6, and it's a one-day lesson, as you can see here in the big picture. When we look at the scope and sequence, we're going to see the standards that it covers, which is numbers 24, 26, 28, and 29. And with all of the scope and sequence, it also will have a teacher note, any prerequisites that you might need for the lesson, materials needed, and usually there's a presentation strategy as well. So if you need some help in running the lesson, those notes are there for you. So if we go to the lesson here, I just want to talk a little bit about the purpose of this. So different conclusions can be made based on random sampling or random assignment. So prior to this, students will have already done some methods for random sampling in some of the previous lessons. In sampling, the random sample should represent the population so that we're able to generalize the findings to the population. In experiments, however, the random assignment allows us to establish cause and effect, and it evens out any extraneous variables that may affect the response. We sometimes call those extraneous variables confounding variables. So if it turns out there is a difference in the groups at the end of the experiment, we can say the treatment is what actually caused the change. So before handing out the lesson, allow students to have a discussion about what they already know about experiments, but highlight the fact that in an experiment, a treatment is imposed, and we have to control for all of the variables so we're able to determine if the treatment is actually what caused the change. So what I would do is walk your students through numbers 1 and 2 and then let them finish page 1. So if we look at the STEM, it says last year EKHS offered an after-school SAT prep class that students could volunteer to take. 44 students took the course and then took the SAT. The average SAT score for this group was 1,220. The average SAT score for all students who did not take the prep class was 1,050. So what you want to lead your students into thinking about is who might have taken this class? Why did those students take the class? Do you think it's because they were more motivated than the average student who would be taking the SAT? So even though the students volunteered, only 44 of them did that. So all of the scores were looked at, and then they probably determined whether or not those people taking the course maybe did have a higher score. So if we look at number 1, it says, is the situation described an observational study or an experiment? So we need to be thinking about whether or not a treatment was imposed. So in this case, we are really just looking at all of the SAT scores. So this is an observational study. The students aren't forced to take the course or the SAT class. On number 2, there's some other vocabulary here about variables, and it says identify the explanatory variable and the response variable. So in other math classes, students are probably familiar with an independent variable. That's really what an explanatory variable is. That is what we control, or the factors that we're actually looking at. And a response variable is really like our dependent variable. So that's what we're going to measure. So in this case, we're going to look at whether or not somebody took a class. And so my explanatory variable is that whether or not the student took the class. The response is what is measured or what's actually looked at. So the response in this case is how well did they score on the SAT. Now, if your students, after your discussion about experiments, if they have a pretty good foundation, you may let them go ahead and work 1 and 2 together, but it does have some new vocabulary, which you can always come back and define. So I would like for you guys to work through numbers 3, 4, and 5. And after you finish number 5, you'll watch the next video. I'll go through the highlights of the vocabulary and we'll annotate the margins. And then I will also go through the big ideas on page 2.